If you're an early stage company and you want to do business with a big company, it's a pretty hard thing to do. So you're kind of, the metaphor I like to use is you're sort of rowing around this in the kayak, knocking on the side of this big boat, trying to get somebody to pay attention to you. So that's where we've learned to insert ourselves as the translator and the person on the side of the boat that opens the door and says, come on in.
Hey, it's Nate DiSarro, and welcome to Titans of Industry, the podcast where I talk to industry leaders and innovators who are at the top of their game and leading the pack in their fields, uncovering some of the best stories in today's business landscape. In this episode, I sit down with Wayne Miller, the executive director at the Venture Center in Little Rock. This Pittsburgh native is all about people and the power of teams. Wayne talks about his passion for helping to change the trajectory of FinTech organizations, why it's more valuable to have access to a market than access to capital, and how 30 years of motorcycle racing might be responsible for his risk tolerance in business. Needless to say, Wayne is a powerhouse that is fueling the next generation of entrepreneurs who will inevitably change the world. And now let's get to the episode. But before we do, our team at Content Titan wants you to know that we understand the challenges business leaders and marketers are facing right now with moving to a more virtual world. We are experts in taking human connections and turning them digital. From virtual events and video presentations to promotional content and advertising, we are here to help guide you through the process of staying in front of your audience and making your life a little bit easier. People tell us all the time that they are lost and don't know what to say or do, and we exist to help your business continue to move forward virtually. So if you're ready to take your business and content strategy virtual, our Titans are ready to help. Let's get your business back to business. Now here's my conversation with Wayne Miller. Wayne, thanks so much for hopping on the podcast. Really appreciate you taking the time and look forward to this conversation. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. Just based on what I know about you, you've kind of done a little bit of everything, like literally. So I'd love to just get some of your background and how you ended up as the executive director here at the Venture Center.
Hey, well, thanks, Nate. Thanks for having me to be a part of this. This is an honor. I've been really lucky. I guess my dad would have probably said that I had difficulty holding a job, but I come from a family of entrepreneurs to some degree. Both my sisters are artists, have their own businesses and so forth. It sort of started delivering papers as a kid, and having my own money, and that was the thing, and being able to spend it and do with it what I wanted to. But it's been a great journey. I just always loved making money and being in business.
Don't we all?
Yeah, and probably to some extent at the expense of education at some points in my life too. My first real business was when I was in college. I spun records to put myself through school. Believe it or not, I was a DJ, and it was the disco era, which was sort of crazy. So it was actually a lot of fun. But and we used to obviously try to mix records effectively, and we did that orally. We did it using our ears. And I met a guy by the name of George Lamble, and I was working at a place called C.J. Barney's in the Wooden Keg. I was going to Pitt at the time, and he said, "What if you could do that visually instead of orally?" And I said, "Well, that would be great." So we started working on this concept, and we created a company called Discotech, Tech, believe it or not. And we developed a product called the Beat Meter, and it was a device that enabled us to mix records we used a heart rate monitor to be able to assess the bass speed of the music and then be able to align them for a segue effectively, and we used LEDs to do that. And then we created a second product called the Beat Counter, ultimately sold that company and sold the technology, made a little bit of money. And after school, my mom got sick, and returned back to the DC area where my mom was to tend to her a little bit. And with the little bit of money that I had, decided I was going to buy a restaurant. So I did that and got into the restaurant business and was pretty fortunate. Most people getting into that business, it's very high risk. And I had the good fortune of not only owning one restaurant, but 3 restaurants. I sold my interest in my first one and then opened 2 more. Fell in love with Cajun cooking, which was something that was not a big deal at that point. People really didn't know that much about it, but I'd been to New Orleans and really just loved the food and loved the people. So I wanted to bring that to Washington. So went actually to New Orleans, spent a couple of months, had a chance to work with some extraordinary people down there. I worked with Paul Prudhomme, I worked with the Brennans, et cetera. And people who were quite remarkable and really taught me an interesting lesson, which is very much kind of, I think, part of one of my fundamental philosophies is, giving people the recipe is different than getting it done, right? And these people were very transparent. They were happy to show me what they did and share their recipes and share the way they did things. And, you still had to execute on your own, right? And a friend of mine here always says, I have a lot of Wolfgang Puck's recipe books at home, it doesn't make me a great cook, right? So interesting thing. But anyhow, we had some great success. We opened the first Cajun restaurant in Washington and was recognized as one of the best in the country when we did that. And the restaurant business was tough. It's a lot of hours. It's hard on family. And I made a step into corporate America at that point. Went to work for Kraft. And I knew food service, so it was kind of a natural step for me. And went into a marketing and a sales role and did that for a couple of years, and again, pretty successfully, and had a lot of fun doing it. And knew a lot of people in the business, and so I was able to be credible and so forth. And I had a friend who was selling medical equipment, and he was making just a pile of money. And I said, I got to get into that racket, and ultimately did. And went to work for a company called Hill-Rom for almost 11 years, largest manufacturer of patient room furnishings and equipment in the world. And had a great career with them, and ultimately ended up in a national development role for them, helped them with a lot of M&A stuff, did some international work, and that was great. And I had a little change in my life marriage-wise, and ended up coming back to D.C., left Hill-Rom, and was recruited back by Nations Bank to help them with a company called Takeout Taxi, which was really the first delivery service for restaurants. And I mean, this was pre-internet. We were using fax machines. It was a franchised operation. And anyhow, it ended up going bad, which was unfortunate because it was really onto something. Although I think today the Grubhubs, et cetera, still struggle with, trying to make a real profit at doing it. But it was interesting at the time and so forth. I knew that was a high-risk situation going into it and ended up at Deloitte & Touche, interestingly enough. And Deloitte was trying to build a national sales organization, and met a guy by the name of Tony Bazzelli, who was the managing partner, and interestingly enough, also from Pittsburgh. But and he said, "Hey, look, we'd love to have you come in and see. Do you think you can stand this thing up?" And I said, "I'd love to have the opportunity." So about 3 years into that, we ended up growing it into 16 cities. I was generating close to $300 million a year worth of revenue, and it was really, really successful. And it was a lot of fun, and I loved it. And the internet thing was starting to kind of get some energy at this point, and I was approached by a guy by the name of Raul Fernandez, who had started a company called Proxicom. He said, "Look, do you think you can come in and do for Proxicom what you did for Deloitte?" And I said, I think I can. And I ended up going to work with him and had a chance to really be in an early stage company who was going through an IPO process, contributed to that, learned a lot about it, and did so. And we did so very successfully. It was sold to Dimension Data for about $300 million and continues to exist today as part of Dimension Data. And during that time, I had a friend, David Abramson, who unfortunately is gone, but was a great mentor of mine, who I met through my experiences with the Northern Virginia Technology Council and the Greater Washington Board of Trade. And David was an ad guy, and he had this idea of repurposing advertising, using the internet as a platform. And along with two other ad guys, a guy by the name of Bill Replogle and Muncie Ferguson, and they wanted to try to get a business plan built around this concept. And if you think about it, it's sort of interesting. Creative is generated in large quantities, right? So an agency will generate 4 or 5 ideas for a client. And some of those are the best ideas, if you will, and they never really see the light of day. But the other thing, too, is for small to medium-sized businesses, their access to great advertising and great content is really hard for them to get access to. And so the idea of AdMine, which was the name of the company, was to build a platform where creative could share this content, but also small to medium-sized business could have access to great advertising at a fraction of the cost and really a fraction of the time. And also to be able to put pedigree behind it. So if I'm in Tucson, as an agency, I can't do business with any other bank. But I could take that work and repurpose it in other parts of the nation and actually kind of syndicate it, if you will, right? So that was the business of AdMine. So we started off on a path. I built a business plan for them. I was still working at Proxicom. And I liked the business. I liked the idea of it. And then they said to me, "Do you think you can help us raise some money?" And so I knew some folks, and a guy by the name of Mark Hine with a company called Venture House, and went to Mark with the idea. And Mark said, "I love this idea. I'd like to put some money into it, but I'll only do it if you're involved." So I said, I'm really pretty happy what I'm doing at Proxicom and so forth. But I went to Raul and I said, "Look, this is an interesting opportunity." He said, "You should seize it. Go do it." Said, "This is an extraordinary time. The internet bubble was, expanding at a ridiculous pace." So went and started AdMine. Ultimately raised about $18 million. We existed for 2.5 years. And unfortunately, like many businesses at that time with the internet bubble, we did not have a path to profit. So a lot of lessons learned there. Built the company up to about 60 people, and inside of about 8 or 9 months, we grew very rapidly. We had a world-class advisory board. It was a great experience. It was my MBA, but ultimately, we were able to raise half of the cash that we needed, and then we were unable to get the second half. So I had to shutter the company, and that was a lousy day to have to send 60 people home, and I took some pretty large personal loss on that as well, because I'd invested a lot, and having to tell your investors that it's just it's not going to happen. So I got done with that, and I said, I'm out of the tech business for a while. I'm going to go into something that's a little brick and mortar. And I think I shared with you, I'm kind of a gearhead. I raced motorcycles for a good portion of my life. I've always been a car guy, collected cars, et cetera, and love restoring old vehicles, and done my share of British and German stuff over the years. But I thought, I'm going to do something different. So I looked at the franchise world and ended up buying an AMCO transmission shop. That business, and ended up buying 4 more transmission shops. So I kind of did like a mini roll-up. The transmission business became very commoditized. We were able to get a lot of scale out of this. For example, I need to have 5 rebuilders. I ended up centralizing my transmission rebuilding into a central area, which enabled us to purchase more effectively. I could quality control. Hired a couple of kids with a couple of small pickup trucks who run transmissions back and forth to our Manassas location. But tough business, and people are pretty fond of their cars, and being in the transmission business is kind of like being an undertaker, honestly, because it's not a repair that people prepare for. It's an expensive repair, a couple, $2,000-$3,000. And so one of the things we also did is we converted the businesses to doing total care for people. So we were doing brakes and tune-ups and that kind of stuff. And it's funny that when you have a reputation, as AMCO does, for transmission work, that people's perception of your ability to do things like brake work or tune-ups is like, are you sure you know how to do that? I mean, here you are working on what is essentially, really the most complicated system in the vehicle, and yet they don't have that confidence. But we got into that, and the idea there was that, we weren't sitting around like the undertaker waiting for people's transmissions to die, but rather building relationships with them and so forth. So great experience. Ended up selling those shops all at once and getting out of the business, and was glad that I had that opportunity. After I sold the transmission shops, I was kind of actively looking for another business to buy. And interesting time in how people are aging in this country and the businesses that are beginning to present themselves. And so I met a guy who owned the second largest taxi company in the country. The guy who was his chief operating officer was retiring, and they were looking for somebody to take over that role. What did I know about the taxi business? Well, this was a completely integrated company. They had their own body shops, they had their own repair facilities, et cetera. They had 1,500 vehicles. We had black cars. We had vans, et cetera. So I ended up taking the role, but my intent was to buy the company. The company was doing about $42 million in business, and was able to step in and really have an impact, change the perspective of the business, because most people perceive the people sitting in the back of the taxi as the customer. Well, in fact, that really wasn't the case. The customers, we really were in the business of renting cabs to drivers. That was our business, right? So my perspective was our drivers were our customers, and if we took good care of them, then ultimately they would take good care of people in the back seat of the car. It was an attempt at changing a culture of a company like that was 50 years old, and dealt with people literally from all over the world, because drivers came from every culture. Some were a lot more interesting to deal with than others. Some were more pleasant to deal with than others. But I did really see the drivers as my customers, and I think they kind of liked that perspective. In the process of negotiating the transaction, what was interesting is, as that was occurring, there was this little company called Uber that was starting to show its face. And we were kind of looking at strategies about how are we going to deal with Uber. We were going to turn our drivers into private owners, that kind of stuff. We had some things. And ultimately, I elected not to pursue it. And I was very fortunate that I didn't, because the company went from about a $42 million level of volume to about an $8 million level of volume as a result of Uber's impact. So, and many of the drivers that work for us became Uber drivers, because they're paying us $150 a day for a car plus gas. You start adding that up. We only charge them 6 out of 7 days a week, but when you start looking at buying a Suburban, paying the fees on that at $800 or $900 a month, whatever it might be, and being able to be kind of the champion of your own destiny, Uber's value proposition was very, very good. And the way in which they really took the dispatch aspect out of the process was also quite interesting. Anyway, after that, I continued to work with startups, invested in a couple other companies, and continued to do that. And with my background at Hillrom, I ended up working for a company as the operating partner of a PE firm who was into building neurostimulators. And so we looked at that market. There was sort of a race to the bottom in terms of how they were marketing and so forth. And we had this little company called Innovative. We ended up looking at other companies of like size and structure, did sort of a roll-up, brought 4 of these companies together, and we were able to change the market structure of it, improve the product, again, consolidated our manufacturing in China and did a lot of things with that. And I kind of put myself out of a job ultimately because you did need 4 CEOs to be operating these companies. And it was at that point that I kind of stopped and got out of PE and decided to take a little time off and kind of figure some things out. So I played a lot of tennis for a while, and I decided that wasn't a great way to make a living. My wife wanted me out of the house. And so I was approached by another accelerator organization to go to Florida and start a medical device accelerator. And what I noticed about it was really great for investors, but not so great for entrepreneurs. It really leaned into creating deal flow for investors more than it was really helping these companies accelerate, really helping them get to market. If nobody buys what you have to sell, then you don't have a business, right? Getting customers is such an important thing. And in the difference of the value of a company with one customer and no customers can be, algorithmically different, to say the least. So, I turned the job down, but I started to look. Because I liked the fact that, I had all this experience. I've done all these different things. I always felt that I had a little bit of an advantage because, I can look at problems from a business perspective at kind of 360 degrees because there are things that I learned working for Hillrom that I applied to the taxi business. There were things I learned in the taxi business that I applied to startup, efforts and so forth. So it's funny how it works. And it really does get down to, kind of people and market as you distill all that and being able to do that effectively. But as in my search, I tripped across this organization called the Venture Center here in Little Rock, Arkansas. And I had never stepped foot in Arkansas in my life. And so I applied to the position, and I'd been up in New Jersey because I remember the day very distinctly when I got a call from the leadership here. I was taking the Cape May ferry back from New Jersey back to Delaware, and I was the only one on the boat, right? It was me and my car, and I'm having this interview going across on the ferry that night and talking about it and what these guys were doing. And their approach was different, and I liked it, which was really getting focused on solving very specific problems for this entity. So we went back and forth for about a month, and I finally said, look, I'm getting in an airplane. I'm coming to Little Rock. I got to see what this is all about. I'm really interested in this. There's a lot of things said about Little Rock and about Arkansas, but it is the people here that are extraordinary. And, they kind of put the full Nelson on you, and I had a chance to meet all these great people and dignitaries and so forth, and it was awesome. And so 2 weeks before the second round of the accelerator started, I came here and went to work, so really kind of went from the frying pan into the fire, as they say. So it's been awesome. I came in initially to run the accelerators, ultimately became the executive director of the Venture Center, and I am like the luckiest guy on earth. I love my work. I love our mission. I have a great team that we've built over the 3.5 years that I've been here. And, we're really in a growth phase. We've added a big second client. Our community programming has gone from, 20 or 30 to 50 or 60. We've got 4,000, 5,000 people coming through the Venture Center, virtually now, of course, as opposed to actually. And I think, the community we really have, I think, done a good job of understanding what our mission is, which is really about education, collaboration, and acceleration. And that's really been the 3 pillars that we've built this on. And we're trying to deliver content that's relevant to people who want to start businesses and scale businesses. We're trying to find great companies to help solve problems. And I guess that kind of brings us around to the whole issue of corporate innovation. So let me stop there and let you ask.
Sure. Yeah. So incredible background, incredible experiences that have ultimately, like you said, given you this 360-degree view at how to step into an accelerator program, the Venture Center, and be able to help these companies go to market and grow and scale and do the things that they have to do. And it's a really interesting parallel. I have the opportunity to work with businesses in all different sectors, and it is interesting to be able to pull from one industry and apply that to another. And people that have been in an industry their entire life think you're brilliant, and it's like, no, this is just how another industry did it. It's
sure.
I don't feel like I'm any smarter than anybody else. I just have experience or the opportunity to be a part of something that allows me to bring that perspective. And I think perspective is a huge thing. So in a nutshell, give me just the 30-second pitch of what the Venture Center actually is and does, and you kind of just hit on that a little bit, but and then like how are you guys taking these companies and creating innovation out in the world?
Yeah, great question. It's we are what's referred to as an ESO, or an entrepreneurial service or support organization, right? And there are many of these around the country, and some great ones in Arkansas. We have really worked in the last couple of years to collaborate more effectively to really help support entrepreneurs in the state. But the first thing is to create an environment where people can become educated. I mean, that's like I say, it's kind of our three pillars are about education, collaboration, and acceleration, and we'll sort of talk about each of those. But providing workshops, providing opportunities, people get very wrapped up from an entrepreneur's perspective around access to capital, right? Because obviously that's important. But really, it's really about access to market, in my opinion. And I believe very strongly that, again, it gets back to what I said earlier. If people don't buy what you're selling, you don't have a business. And if you can demonstrate that people will love what you have to sell, you can get people to buy your product or service, do that effectively, understand how to pivot accordingly, et cetera, and do that. One of the things that we do is we leverage a number of great methodologies. One of them, of course, is Lean Canvas, right? When I go back to AdMind days, that was a 30-page business plan, right? We don't write 30-page business plans anymore, right? We start with a Lean Canvas approach. We lean into failure now in a much different fashion than we did before. For many years, I didn't talk about AdMind because it was a big failure, and I didn't think it was something. But today, I talk about it, and I talk about what I learned from it, and I talk about the experiences that I've had and so forth, and how it made me better, different, and more capable, and really able to kind of see around corners that from those experiences and, as you said, that perspective. So we try to provide a platform where people can get well educated. We really try to leverage the mentorship base that exists in Arkansas. Arkansas's got a remarkable DNA when it comes to the founding of companies. I mean, everything from Stevens to Euronet Systems to Arkansas Systems to obviously the Walmarts, the J.B. Hunts, and so forth, and Tyson. It's interesting. As I came to Arkansas, I think if you don't live here, you don't really know that much about Walmart. You have sort of a jaundiced view of them. And, the first time I went through the Walmart Museum and I'm looking at what Sam Walton accomplished, and obviously it's Fortune #1 company and $650 billion, and you look at his principles, you go, wow, this guy was an amazing entrepreneur. And it's one of the things we try to do when we bring people through here is make sure they get that experience. But so through a variety of programs on the community side, we try to create this educational platform. So it is about things like Lunch and Learn, where we bring people in to talk about specific concerns. Like last week we had one that focused on how to sell a business, right? We have people like Charles Morgan and Millie Ward and Jim Womble, who are great entrepreneurs, Justin George, et cetera, who come and spend time with us at our fireside chats. So we have our pitch contest twice a year, which is Pitch and Pint, which gives people a chance to generate a little bit of money for starting their business, and so that's a lot of the community aspect of this, and that's great work and a lot of fun. We really do try to give people a place to start, but also if they're trying to scale a business too, is help them with those skills as well.
You mentioned an important word, and I think just due to the relevance of where we're at right now, but you talked about how pivot is a kind of an important piece of what you support these companies in. Here's your Lean Canvas, here's your approach to the market. But right now, I think is a very important time for business owners, especially entrepreneurs, to understand the value of the word pivot. Because over the last 5-6 months, we've seen this global phenomenon happen in a way that I know in my lifetime, I've never seen anything like this and don't know that I ever will again.
Let's hope not.
Yeah, let's certainly hope not. But it's caused so many businesses, young and old, to pivot, essentially.
Right.
So from your background, from your perspective, from the leadership you bring to the table, talk a little bit about the importance of pivoting and understanding the nature of not just how to do it, but when and the importance of it.
Pivot's become kind of a sexy word, right? It's funny how it's kind of been adopted, and if you really think about what it's about, it really, at the root of it, it's about listening to your customers, understanding what they need, and figuring out how to manifest the best results from that, right? And I think the difference, and I think the Lean Canvas sort of leans into this a little bit too, is that we try to be more agile today in how we operate our businesses, and it's one of the challenges that big businesses have. It's why we're successful at doing what we do when it comes to the acceleration piece with FIS and the ICBA, because it's really, really hard for big companies to be agile, to pivot, to change their course of direction. I think one of the things interesting about pivoting as a whole is most of the time it is not necessarily a major change that the company needs to take, right? It's usually a gentle tap on the rudder, if you will, or a little bit of adjusting the sails. I always love the expression, we can't control the wind, but we can adjust the sails, and I think that's what that's about. Sometimes that's intuitive, right? Sometimes it's a gut thing. Something's like, I think we need to do this as an organization. I'm sure you've experienced that. I know I have as well.
Sure.
But then we think about it differently today. We want to go out and validate that through the process we refer to as customer discovery and talking to our customers. For us this year, it's been interesting as we talk about COVID is we had to move from a non-virtual program to a virtual program. So when it comes to the accelerators, so typically we got, 10 companies here, 12 weeks, we're bringing 60 banks through the whole thing. So as we started to look at moving this virtually, we certainly had ideas about how we wanted to approach that. But we took a step back and said, let's talk to the bankers, let's talk to our customers, let's talk to our participants about how they think this should go. Because, for example, we typically bring them in here, they spend a day with us, right? So they're here for 6 or 8 hours, interviewing the companies, talking with the companies, mentoring the companies, and helping them kind of shape and form their solutions. Well, you can't put somebody on Zoom for 6 or 8 hours, right? So you have to think about that. And so what we learned in this process and we evaluated was we ended up doing it over 3 days, 3-hour sessions. We're seeing a lot more participation. So is it an impactful business decision that's changed the profitability for us? No, it's not. Eventually there's nonprofit. But the point is that by listening to our customers, it's a good example of how we were able to change what we're doing to more effectively serve the entrepreneurs, our stakeholders, and also our clients. So that's one approach.
I think another thing that's very valid right now, and you've mentioned you've experienced this in your past, one is the failure piece and the fact that we don't want to talk about those things, at least for a while. But two, every day we're faced with challenges to run and operate businesses. And I think right now a lot of people are facing challenges that there's no book they can go read. There's not really people they can go talk to that have been through a situation like this. From your perspective, talk a little bit about the challenges that you face and how you're helping people overcome these challenges and just ways to think about what these challenges bring to the table.
Yeah, it's a great question. I was on a call a couple of weeks ago, and somebody said to me, so how have you prepared the companies coming in for the accelerator to deal with COVID? And I had to laugh because I'm not sure any of us were prepared for this. I get a chance to talk to a lot of great leaders in this country, but also obviously in this marketplace. And we've actually talked about having a session here at the Venture Center around this because there really isn't in a leadership role today a single decision that we make. I mean, whether literally it's getting up and going downstairs or how we interact with people where COVID doesn't have some impact in something. And the only certainty, of course, in this current environment is uncertainty. And, frankly, it's exhausting in a leadership role because, you got to care about your people, you got to care about your customers, you have to sustain your business. So it is a real challenge. I think we just have to look at this one day at a time. And as we're doing that, try to learn from what is working successfully for us and then continue to try to deploy that. We're in the middle of an accelerator right now. We get ready to start our next one in January. We're going to make a hard decision about the 1st of October about whether or not we're going to do that here or we're going to do it virtually. I can tell you if we do it virtually, we're going to be better at it doing it virtually the second time than the first time. And so it is taking those lessons and really learning from them as we go along here. But man, it's a crazy time, but it's also remarkable to me, though, how flexible people have been. The ability to engage using a virtual approach is much different than, I know you've probably had the experience being on 5 or 6 Zoom calls in a day or more, and it does take it out of you, but at the same time, you feel like to some extent you're being a little bit more productive too. I think you feel like you're getting more done. You're certainly compressing time in the course of the day, and you don't have the insulation of working with people a lot.
You mentioned how big business is obviously a little slower to move, slower to turn, more like a cruise ship or large barge as far as navigating the ocean, whereas small startups can make decisions quickly and adapt and change. You have the experience and the opportunity to experience a lot of these startups and what they're doing and how they're changing and innovating things. What's something you've seen that's been really interesting as far as how some of these startups have made the change or the pivot or kind of adapted to the current? Because most of these companies exist because they've created a new opportunity within the marketplace. So what are they doing now that their whole business was built on this, and then all of a sudden the world changes does it affect these businesses? Are they innovating in new ways? Because that's what they're built on is innovation in different ways of thinking.
The answer is yes, and I think a great example is, so we work with community banks. That's a big part of what we do with the ICBA, which is the Independent Community Banks of America, and also with FIS as well, who obviously serves, a large portion of that community bank environment, but over the course of the last, 5 months, we've seen small businesses really struggle. And obviously there's been solutions that are presented, which are PPP and EIDL, et cetera. And so what we've seen is some of these companies that have built technology that's used for lending, for example, they have pivoted or changed their platforms in order to help the community banks service the small businesses through the PPP piece, right? So we have one company, Tesla, another company, LendSmart. LendSmart was in the mortgage business. That's primarily what they did, and then they ended up getting into the PPP business. Tesla is really a back-end solution that enables banks to become more efficient through consolidating data and information into single platforms and single dashboards, et cetera, making them more effective. They too stepped into the PPP piece, working with people like Mark Cuban, et cetera, to develop ppp.org. So, these guys are sharp. And, one of the nice things, I love working with these people because, one, they're very inspirational. Being an entrepreneur is a courageous path, right? I can tell you from my own experiences, I mortgaged the house and did all the things that you think you do, and some of those things work out well, some of them don't. It's a challenge on family, it's ridiculous hours, you're always raising something. You're either raising people, you're raising capital, you're raising customers, the three things that you really do as a CEO. But yeah, I think the beauty of these, early stage companies and these startups is they have the ability to be very agile, right? And they can shift and change dramatically and really pivot on a dime, if you will. So we've absolutely seen that, and it's been quite effective. And I think, I think some of them will get back to their original knitting in the meantime. But as we go through COVID, some of them have really stepped up to address it and made a dramatic impact, I think, on these small businesses and their capacity to survive. So it's been somewhat altruistic as well, frankly.
I love that. Let's talk a little bit about you as an individual. So you mentioned to me you've raced motorcycles for 30 years. Yeah. There's people out there that would think that's crazy, but then there's other people that would say, well, what else have you done? Jump out of airplanes. Are you an adrenaline junkie? What's something that kind of keeps you going, keeps you motivated? Because obviously the business world can be draining. Dealing with people and problems and raising capital all day, every day can wear somebody out. But what are some of the things that just sort of keep you motivated?
I tell you, it's wonderful to be at a time in my life where it's really about the work and not the money, because there is a stage in our lives where the money is really important. And it's always important to me. I need to make a living and want to make a living. But my motivation and my inspiration absolutely comes from the founders of these companies and for the team that I work with. And, it is, my team will tell you I'm pretty emotional about it. I'm so moved by what they're able to do and their success and seeing that. And, the other thing is there's so much power in helping others be successful and the power of we. And, if you don't really worry about who gets the credit, rather who gets the business, it's really amazing what happens. And that's so much about my inspiration. Working with our clients, seeing people take an idea and bringing it to fruition, seeing them be successful in raising capital, being able to, take the experience of this team, of the people that we have involved, it is a collaborative effort today. Nobody does this on their own anymore. This isn't it's a team sport, right? It's also a full contact sport too. But it really is where I get the motivation every day. And it is so great to see that stuff happen and to see the stakeholders, the state of Arkansas plays a role, to see FIS, the ICBA, these entrepreneurs who come through our programming, to see them move the needle in some fashion, that's awesome. And to see them get to success. Because look, frankly, this is what we do is we're dealing with probably the riskiest types of businesses that you can possibly find. But the other thing too is, I'm also very motivated by the fact that over the last 3.5 years, this team has created a deliberate approach that if you follow the recipe, we will gain you great success and help you innovate effectively, right? This isn't random, it's deliberate. It's demand-driven innovation. And if we can identify the problems effectively, we have this remarkable capacity to source great companies to help provide those solutions and then help vet them to a point where, again, success should be the outcome. And it typically is. And we're very fortunate. So long answer to your question as usual, but...
That's great. So there's usually not a secret ingredient in the recipe that just all of a sudden makes things work for a company. It's often similar ingredients. There's always flour involved. There's always butter involved. There's always,
Sure.
There's always the same base ingredients. But what's one of those things, maybe the added nutmeg that people don't really know is part of it? What's one of the sort of hidden gems that people might not know about how to grow and accelerate a company? Because a lot of people don't have options to be a part of an ESO or grow their company with the support of, coaching and things like that. But is there anything that's kind of tucked away in there that...
For me, it always gets down to one thing for me, really, and it's really about people. Steve Jobs said it, and I'm a big believer. You hire smart people to tell you what to do as a leader, not for you to tell them what to do. And that has served me very, very well. I try to give my folks enough rope to hang themselves with, and fortunately none of them do that. What's important, though, as it relates to that is people need to have a clear direction, right? I think you have to understand what your objectives are. You have to understand your mission. You have to set goals. People need a North Star. And I think if as a leader you can help set that vision and give them the platform on which to do that, then my role on a day-to-day basis is to make sure that they have the resources to accomplish that. I also think I'm a great believer, and I look to these guys to push back, right? I have a lot of wild ideas. Some of them are great, some of them are not so great. And I encourage them to do the same thing. I don't want to be a dictatorial leader. That's not my interest. I want to say, hey, look, here's a direction I'd like to go, and what do you guys think? And rely upon them and their expertise and knowledge and their experience to help guide us in that direction. So I think the secret to it, again, is have a clear direction, right? You got to know where north is. Secondly, just find the best people that you can find. Hire slow and fire fast. A bad individual in an organization, the metaphor is always it's cancerous, and it is. I mean, it can really have a very negative impact on folks. So the folks who don't get aligned, get them in, get them out fast, and also get your team involved in the decision process of bringing people on board. People in business like to talk an awful lot of times about being a family. And I'm it's not that I'm anti-family, but families are, frankly, all due respect, they can be kind of weird, right? I'm all about teams. I think it is about, I think a team can be a family ultimately, but if you think about athletics, you think about sports, you're the quarterback, this is your job, you're the coach, this is your job, this is the goal line, this is where we're going. The metaphor really applies so much more. So build a great team, get people to fill those positions well. And listen, I love people also who come from a background of playing group sports, team sports. People have worked in retail because, again, if you take good care of your people, they'll take good care of your customers and your clients. So I don't think those are secrets, but those things have served me very, very well.
So create a great mission, hire great people, and get out of the way.
Yeah, and look for the next thing too. Right? That's the other thing. I'm always out on the bow of the boat trying to figure out where we're going next. Right? That's fun stuff to do. Right?
You've got to have your own vision as an individual. You've got to have your own objectives. You mentioned working with these founders is kind of what gives you the motivation. But what's on your kind of big goals list? What do you hope to accomplish over the next year, 2 years, 3 years that you maybe haven't done before in your career?
The journey that I've been on here at the Venture Center has been extraordinary for me. It's been, I feel, as trite as it sounds, that I've sort of found my purpose, right? It's like, what do I do with all this stuff that I've done? I always think about starting another business. I always think about another startup. I always think about buying businesses and stuff like that. And then I wake up and look around me. But I'll probably do something again. I would like to own a little 60-seat restaurant again someday. I'd love to build Shelby Cobras and sell them and have a little shop, at the beach and dune buggies, and maybe I'll do that someday too. But those are things maybe for retirement if I ever do that. But I think we've built something great here, and for me, the next year or two is about growing the Venture Center, adding more clients, continuing to build the entrepreneurial efforts that we have here and support what happens in Arkansas. Just really want to help Arkansas get to some big exits with some great companies and get us more on the map. We have some extraordinary companies doing great things here that we are involved in some of them we're not. But, COVID has changed our perspective. A year or so ago, I was talking an awful lot about Arkansas being kind of the flyover state. And, as we see people exiting New York and San Francisco in droves as of the COVID situation and this idea of really working from anywhere, it creates a level of relevance for us where it's really about where the people are and where the work gets done and not so much about being in San Francisco or New York. And it's funny, we had a company come through here, Digital Onboarding, who during their evaluation period, investors were looking at them because they don't have an office. They're all virtual, and Ted built the company virtually. And it was causing a challenge for them in terms of their valuation as a company. COVID hit, all of a sudden it became more valuable. So it's really sort of funny what's happening there. So I love helping big companies solve problems and helping them innovate. And so that's our focus. We've just brought a person on actually to help us support that role full time and to help us build that next generation of what the Venture Center will be.
I love it. Who are some of the people in your world? You threw out a lot of names earlier of people you worked with and people that have kind of been a part of your world. But who are some of the titans or the heroes in your own life that you've kind of looked to or drawn inspiration from?
Probably most of them, frankly, are not that well known. I grew up in a family of really smart people, and my dad was great, my mom was great, so I learned so much from them. I talked about David Abramson, who was a great mentor of mine, Tony Bazzelli, these folks that I met at Deloitte, and even Bill Kelly from Hillrom. I've always had the roles that I've gotten into most of the time were either new roles or roles where people had failed before. So those were interesting positions to be in many of those instances. But Steve Jobs is an interesting guy. Obviously, there's some things that he said and so forth. I love Einstein's thinking and so forth. I think highly about him. Bill Gates. These are people that we all know and so forth. Bill Gates' perspective and how he looks at things are just remarkable, and how he looks around a problem from a whole different perspective. And I'm very inspired by people who just look at things differently, and that's, I think, part of what I enjoy in working with these early stage companies is, what inspired you to get up one day and go figure out how to make merchants ATMs? What made you do that? The why is always so interesting to me, and really the question that I love to ask the most is, why are you doing this? And there's so much that you can learn from them and how they're motivated to be successful, because you do have to have the grit, the tenacity, the persistence to be successful as an entrepreneur, because it's brutal. It's hard, it's challenging, and it's not always easy. The other thing too is, I'm also very inspired by the person who starts a great business, whether it's a restaurant or a nail salon or a dry cleaner. I don't really care. We tend to focus so much on the unicorns today. We forget about these small businesses that, people call lifestyle businesses. Well, what's wrong with a business that, generates a couple $100,000 a year in cash and allows a family to do great things and supports their community? It's one of the things I've learned with community banks and dealing with the ICBA. These folks who run these community banks are third and fourth generation bankers, right? These folks are my heroes, what they've been able to accomplish, and they run these small businesses and they care about their communities and they support the local drugstore and the local repair shop and the gas station and the convenience store. That's pretty cool stuff to me, because that's really the backbone of our country. And so I get a lot of inspiration from those folks, but also some of those titans, as you said. I was always a kid also that I love the space program, so I've always been inspired by astronauts, people like John Glenn and people who've raced cars like Mario Andretti and stuff like that. So good stuff.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I think a lot of people look at these unicorns and they say, well, I want to be the next Mark Zuckerberg or Steve Jobs or whoever that, becomes a billionaire. And we think that's what it has to be in order to say I'm a successful entrepreneur or business person, is I've got to attain this crazy amount of revenue. When in reality, most people, if they hit $1 million company, they'd be top 1%, or whatever.
That's absolutely right.
It's incredible that some people, I think, dismiss the idea of being an entrepreneur because they think, well, I don't have $1 billion idea.
Right.
And so they just walk away from it. I know plenty of franchise owners that, they're doing great. And they're, like you said, supporting community and having a great lifestyle for the family. And the model's already there for them,
Sure,
And
sure.
so it's really interesting to think through what it actually takes to become an entrepreneur in today's day and age. And now you can do it virtually. You don't have to leave your house.
It's interesting. Having spent time in the restaurant business, you think about, do you open a restaurant today, or do you take some sort of a commercial center where you can have a small industrial kitchen? You never really have to contend with customers on a face-to-face basis if you didn't want to, although that's the part of the business that I loved. But, you can deliver food. You can build businesses today as we start to learn how to exist in this new normal. And I don't know if I like that term necessarily. I'm not sure what normal is anymore. But it gives you the capacity to build businesses and do things in a way that's just so much different than we've ever had it, where physical presence isn't as critical. And it enables you to be able to start businesses at a lower cost of entry. I mean, if you don't need 10,000 square feet to build a restaurant, you can do it in 2,000 square feet and have a back door that enables you to work with Grubhub, and you can serve the same number of people, and you build a great product. People will come to you and take advantage of that. So it's a remarkable time, and if history repeats itself, which it does, it will drive levels of innovation unlike anything we've ever seen before. And I think we're starting to really see that. I think it's really quite remarkable.
So, we've talked a little bit about COVID becoming this kind of global crisis and businesses having to adapt and change. But corporate innovation obviously is something that people should be considering all the time. But talk a little bit about the importance of it right now and what people can kind of conceptualize as far as how they can think through being innovative in their own business.
If you're an early stage company and you want to do business with a big company, it's a pretty hard thing to do. So you're kind of, the metaphor I like to use is you're sort of rowing around this in the kayak, knocking on the side of this big boat, trying to get somebody to pay attention to you. So that's where we've learned to insert ourselves as the translator and the person on the side of the boat that opens the door and says, come on in. But before you can ask them to kind of come onto the boat, the question is, what are you trying to fix? What are you trying to solve? What is the issue? Clearly, COVID has forced us into adoption of technologies and innovation, beyond anybody's comprehension. It's to say the least, it's an unusual time, and clearly, people who have been laggards in terms of innovating are paying the price right now and having to scurry to get to a certain point. I mean, you see businesses large and small have had poor web presences or didn't have an e-commerce platform. Those sorts of things were stopped on their tracks and suddenly had to figure out a way to do it. It's funny, you look at the sign business right now. So every restaurant has a sign. So you're thinking, if I'm in the sign business, I mean, there have been people who have been highly rewarded as it relates to COVID. But, when you look at big companies and you look at companies who are more focused on innovation, there are some key characteristics that they have. One of them is, when you look from an outcomes perspective, is they tend to perform better. So they usually have growth that's usually 5 to 8% higher than other companies, right? So that's a big issue. So they're returning more money to their investors, potentially their shareholders, and to the public as a whole. So that matters. Secondly, and I think one of the most critical aspects of this is that the drive for that is coming from the very top of the organization. So it is an initiative that is embedded into the North Star approach for that organization. And then they also try to define what is innovation to them, right? And the other key ingredient that I see oftentimes is they're conscientious about internal and external concerns. So they look internally to their own people to help identify problems or areas of friction that require solution. The person who's answering the phone at the call center all day, who's dealing with this specific issue, is learning a lot about the customer's perception, right? Also, of course, there's customers on the outside that we deal with on a day-to-day fashion who have issues with what we're doing, with or see specific problems or would like us to do something differently. So being able to qualify and clearly identify where are these points of friction, where are these problems, and also where are areas for improvement. It's not just about what's bad, it's also about what's good, but what can we make better, right? And it's investing in that. I use the expression that innovation is everyone's job, but the real answer to that is that it means it's nobody's job. The problem, again, is in organizations is it has to be, that initiative has to be owned by someone with a clear path to what they're trying to accomplish, to help identify the problems or the areas of concern so that those things can be focused. And there's methods in which you are able to identify that through hackathons and thinkathons. The other thing to add to that as well is that innovation needs to be part of the culture of an organization, and that's a hard thing to do, but you do that in those processes and using those methodologies. You get people thinking about it. And companies who are more innovative and who are following those methodologies and taking that approach, you're also going to find are attracting higher quality people because they feel that they have an environment where they're going to be recognized and free to contribute. Even if the ideas are nuts, it doesn't really matter. Give people that ability to be able to and have the freedom to do that so that they can contribute. And ultimately, too, the other thing, too, is, I talk about it being everybody's job and nobody's job. Most people are not compensated or rewarded for innovative thinking and helping a company do something better. Again, you go back, 25 years, we had Suggestion Box, and the CEO of the company, whoever the best suggestion, got a $50 gift certificate to, Olive Garden, right? But people were compensated for that. Still, that's the point. And so people need to be rewarded for that. Otherwise, it becomes extracurricular, and if it's extracurricular, then it doesn't. We get so focused on our current goals and meeting our current obligations and those sort of things. Innovation needs to be part of that, right? So,
I love it. All right, I want to jump into what I call just a little quick hit questions. But what's the best or latest book you've read lately?
Book called Traction. Really, really good. Gets back to my earlier comments. People spend way too much time working in the business and not on the business. And the book's very, very good as far as that's concerned. So just about done with it. Highly recommend it. It gives a lot of good perspective.
Is there a daily routine that you kind of have to follow or go through, or are you sort of the every day's different kind of person?
I'm pretty habitual. Yeah, I got to get up in the morning and make the bed, take a shower, have my coffee, and look at my emails. There's a process to that. So yeah, absolutely. I don't know. Again, I think it started, when I was a kid delivering newspapers. I've always been an early riser. I love morning. It's quiet. My brain works best at that time before the hustle and bustle of the day begins. So I cherish that early morning time with my family, walking the dog, all that kind of stuff too. It's important.
Do you consume more news or Netflix?
Let me answer that by saying yes, and the reason being is that I'm not a guy that I don't watch a lot of movies. I really like documentaries and stuff like that, so I consume a lot of Netflix that's usually documentary oriented. It also will likely be around my hobbies, which is motorcycling and car racing, but also science and space. Love that stuff. Just can't get enough of it. So,
love it. Best piece of advice you've either given or received?
Oh man, it really gets down to one thing that I say a lot and I think about a lot, which is you don't have to do this on your own. We get very hung up with that sometimes and worry an awful lot about getting the credit. Don't worry so much about that. People really willing to help you. And my dad always said it great. He said, you can have anything in the world that you want. You got to be willing to step up and ask for it and pay the price. And that there's great truth to that. And I think as you build a business, as you innovate, as you do these things, there's some times where we need to work on our own. There's some times we take risk on our own and so forth. But by God, take a step back, look around you, look at the people that are there and willing to help. And people really do like to help. Asking them to buy things is different than asking them to help you with things, right? So I don't know, that's something I believe very strongly in. It served me well.
That's powerful for sure. Do you have any newly formed habits? I know COVID has changed a lot of people's daily habits and routines. Has anything cropped up for you that's either good or bad?
Well, my carbohydrate intake has probably increased during this, but I actually have tried to. I used to play the guitar, and I got away from it for many, many, many years. So my new formed habit is I'm spending about 30 minutes a day getting back on the guitar, hoping to come out of COVID so I can write a couple songs with the Rolling Stones.
That's awesome. Yeah, and they'll still be going, by the way.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure, yeah. Ghost Town's pretty good, actually, so yeah.
If you could write a book or put a big billboard out on the highway, what would the title be or what would the message be?
Wow, that's a tough one. I would say it's all about people. It's all about people. And take the time to surround yourself with good folks who care. Be transparent. Be honest with your feelings and run at things, not away from them. I don't know. It's a hard question to answer in one sentence, but I've done the best I can. So
I love it. You kind of just answered this one, but I'll see if your answer varies here. But favorite artist or musician?
Not necessarily the Rolling Stones. These guys make fun of me because I'm not as in tune with some of the the contemporary music and so forth. But I'm a huge Jimi Hendrix fan and an Eric Clapton fan and a Stevie Ray Vaughan fan. Those guys just could play, and so certainly my favorites right there.
I need to get you and my dad together because his list is about the same. He worked for a company for years called Welch Allen, which was a few years ago acquired by Hillrom.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And then you've talked a lot about restaurants, but favorite food, or what's your favorite kind of restaurant?
Man, I love Cajun and Creole cooking. I really do. And a lot of people don't know it's really truly the only indigenous American cuisine.
Interesting.
Indian food. But as an American Indian is the other one. But it's such amazing stuff because it's such a very collaborative between Spanish, right, and French and so forth, and what comes together. So, big fan of that cuisine. A good bottle of Merlot and a great etouffee is about as good as it gets from me.
Well, Wayne, any last words? Anything you want to get out there about the Venture Center, what you guys are doing here that we haven't talked about?
No, I just would, love people to pay attention to what we're doing here. Come to the website, come to our events, come see what we're doing, get involved. There's really a place for people to participate. We're constantly seeking mentors to help, and you may not be busy doing that, but by God, when you're needed, there's a real chance to make a difference. I think we're doing great work in Arkansas. We've had the good fortune of being recognized globally for the programming that we're doing and so forth, so we'll hope that'll continue. And reach out if we can be helpful. That's what we're here to do. We're here to serve. We are truly servants of this community and to entrepreneurs, and to the extent that we can be helpful to you in any way, shape, or form, we want to do that. And the other thing, too, is if you see great companies who have great ideas, who need a place to incubate or come be part of our Spark program or part of our accelerator, by God, put your hand up and let us know. We're only about 14 eyes with the 7 of us all together, so we're always looking.
I love it. With the world going virtual almost overnight and the digitization of all the things you guys are doing, is this a Central Arkansas-based thing? Can people from outside of Central Arkansas or anywhere in the country really kind of be a part of the lunch and learns you guys are doing virtually and things like that?
Absolutely, and we hope to, and we actually see that. Our participation both through Facebook Live as through our Zoom channels and the things that we're doing has increased dramatically. So we hope that will continue with people sharing what we're doing and coming to be a part of it. One of the things we work really hard on is try to make sure that our content is relevant and that our programming is relevant to people. There's a lot of theater around entrepreneurial stuff, and we don't want to be the circus that comes to town and sets up the tent and walks the elephant down the street and leaves. We want to be here for the long term for people and be a resource that can be supportive to them. So, I'm hopeful that what we have done community-wise is now growing to become more statewide, that can become more national. The people who touch the Venture Center tend to get involved, which is great. Even the bankers who come through, we see them on our community programs and stuff like that, calling in from Virginia and California, New York and Chicago. So that's kind of cool when there's stuff that's, of interest to them. Like we recently did this one group who talked about selling a business. We had a couple of folks on there who had come from, kind of the other side of our business. So, yeah, I hope, that our recognition continues to expand globally and that people will come and participate. I think there's something for everybody here.
I love it. Well, Wayne, thanks so much for being on the show, and best of luck to all the things you guys are doing here.
Nate, thank you. I appreciate that, and appreciate you taking time to listen to my story, and again, hope we can be helpful to somebody.
If you liked this episode of Titans of Industry, head to contenttitan.co/podcast for more episodes, or subscribe on your favorite podcasting app. Thanks for listening.